He was 45 when he lost everything in 1 week. His wife was gone. His father slammed the door shut, and a man with 3 grown children and 1 aging German shepherd walked into the snow with nowhere to go. With his last $700, he bought a broken cabin no one wanted. No heat, no safety, no guarantees. What he did next would cost him the one thing he swore he'd never give up. And for 18 brutal months, every choice pushed his family closer to survival or collapse. Stay with this story, because what he sacrificed and what he fought to win back will stay with you. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. Winter clung to the small Montana town like a stubborn wound, the kind that refused to heal, even as March approached with gray skies pressing low and cold air creeping through every crack. Jack Turner stood motionless in the narrow living room of his father's house, staring at the floor where his children slept. Emily, Michael, and Lucas lay close together on the worn wooden boards, sharing a single thin blanket that barely covered their shoulders. They were all over 18, grown by age but stripped raw by grief exhaustion and the sudden loss of certainty. Jack noticed how instinctively they had positioned themselves, Emily in the middle, her long brown hair spilling across the blanket as if she were still shielding her brothers the way she had when they were small. Michael lay rigid on his back, jaw clenched even in sleep, while Lucas curled slightly inward, one arm tucked beneath his head, the other brushing against his brother's sleeve, as though contact alone might anchor him to the world. Jack himself looked older than 45 in the dim light. His face was sharply lined cheekbones pronounced beneath weathered skin, darkened by years of outdoor labor and winter winds. A rough, untrimmed beard shadowed his jaw, streaked faintly with gray he hadn't had before Anna died. His eyes, once steady and warm, now carried a permanent fatigue, the kind that came from holding everything together when there was nothing left to hold on to. He wore the same clothes he had worn since the funeral, a thick, dark brown leather jacket cracked at the seams, a red and navy flannel shirt beneath it, faded blue jeans, rubbed pale at the knees, heavy leather boots built for cold ground, and a gray wool scarf wrapped loosely around his neck. He had not changed because he had not felt the passage of time. At the doorway lay Rex, an aging German shepherd with a black and tan coat dulled by years, but still powerful, his body stretched across the threshold like a living barrier. Rex was nearly 9, his muzzle dusted with gray-amber eyes, half open even in rest. He had belonged to the family long before the sickness, long before the hospital rooms, and whispered prayers. Now he watched Jack constantly reading his silence, better than any words remaining alert, loyal, unmoving. The house itself felt hostile, though it was familiar. This was Robert Turner's place, solid and stern, like the man who owned it, filled with sharp corners and colder memories. The wind slipped through the window frames, making the curtains shiver. Somewhere in the walls the house groaned, settling like an old man who resented being disturbed. Jack lowered his gaze to his left hand. In his palm rested Anna's wedding ring. Not hers. A thin gold band engraved on the inside with one word, forever. He had taken it from her finger at the funeral himself, his hands shaking as though the cold had finally reached his bones. They had been married 15 years. She had been the softer half of their world, with light skin that flushed easily in the cold blonde hair she wore, pulled back when she worked, and a quiet strength that had steadied Jack's harsher edges. Her illness had changed everything. Months of hospital's debt, sleepless nights. Then one morning, silence. A door slammed down the hall. Robert Turner appeared without warning, filling the doorway like a wall. He was a large man in his 70s, broad-shouldered despite his age, his posture rigid from decades of control. His gray hair stuck out in uneven tufts, and his robe hung crookedly from one shoulder, but his eyes were sharp, burning with something between grief and fury. He did not look at his grandchildren. His gaze locked onto Jack alone. "I buried my son because of you," Robert said, his voice hard and loud enough to echo through the house. "Because you couldn't protect her. Because you dragged this family down." Jack said nothing. He had learned quickly that words only sharpened Robert's anger. Robert turned, grabbed 2 suitcases stacked near the wall, and hurled them into the hallway. One burst open on impact, spilling clothes across the floor: Emily's folded sweaters, Michael's worn work shirts, Lucas's boots tumbling end over end. "Take your things," Robert continued, each word deliberate. "Take them and leave. I won't have you rotting in this house." Emily stirred, but did not wake. Michael shifted brows, furrowing. Lucas exhaled sharply, eyes fluttering open. Jack felt something hollow out inside him. Not shock, not anger. Just an absence, like a door closing somewhere deep in his chest. He bent, slowly zipping the suitcase without looking at what went inside. His movements were steady, almost careful, as though breaking that rhythm might break him entirely. Rex rose silently to his feet, tail low but body firm, positioning himself close to Jack's leg. Emily woke fully, then pushing herself upright. She was tall like her mother, her face pale, but composed eyes already carrying too much understanding. Michael sat up next, silent, shoulders tense. Lucas rubbed his face, blinking at the scattered clothes, at Robert's looming shape at his father. "Dad," Lucas said quietly, his voice cracking just enough to hurt. "Tonight? Where do we sleep, Jack?" Froze. The question struck deeper than Robert's words ever could. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was no answer that wouldn't feel like a lie. He reached for the door instead. Jack slung the suitcase over his shoulder, pulled on his gloves, and opened the door. Cold air rushed in immediately, sharp and unforgiving. Rex stepped forward first, pausing only once to glance back at the house ears tilting, then turning resolutely toward Jack, as if to say he was ready. Emily helped Michael with the second suitcase. Lucas followed close behind, Jack, hands shoved into his pockets, jaw tight. They stepped outside into the gray morning slush, crunching beneath their boots. The sky offered no comfort, only a dull, colorless stretch above them. Jack closed the door behind them. It shut with a final hollow sound. Jack tightened his grip around Anna's ring, feeling the cold metal bite into his skin. He did not look back. He stood there for a moment, unsure whether this was the first step toward rebuilding what had been destroyed, or the moment everything truly ended. The road into the hills disappeared beneath melting snow mud clinging to the tires as winter tightened its grip again earlier than anyone expected. Jack Turner drove in silence, both hands firm on the steering wheel of the borrowed pickup, Rex sitting upright in the passenger seat like a sentinel. The money in Jack's pocket, $700, folded until the edges were soft, felt heavier than it should have, because it represented the end of options. The cabin appeared suddenly between skeletal pines, leaning slightly, as if tired of standing. The roof sagged in 2 places, shingles missing like broken teeth. One window was entirely gone, the frame yawning black while the others were webbed with cracks. Wind moved freely through the structure, whistling low and constant, a sound closer to breathing than weather. Jack parked and stepped out, boots sinking into wet earth. He was tall, broad-shouldered, but exhaustion had carved hollows beneath his eyes and sharpened every angle of his face. His beard was thicker now, untrimmed, his dark hair threaded with gray. He walked the perimeter once, slowly testing the porch boards with his weight. Rex followed, nose to the ground, tail low, but steady ears alert. Inside the cabin smelled of rot and cold iron. The floor dipped underfoot. Old newspapers lay scattered in a corner beside a rusted stove that hadn't been used in years. Jack stood there a long moment, imagining his children inside, imagining the nights ahead, and forced himself not to turn back. The cellar, an elderly man named Harold Quinn, thin as a fence post, and wrapped in a faded parka, handed over a single key without ceremony. Harold's hands shook, whether from age or the cold, Jack couldn't tell. Nobody wanted it, the man said, simply, eyes avoiding the cabin. You sure? Jack nodded once. He was sure of nothing except that there was nowhere else to go. They moved in that same afternoon. Emily Turner, 22, tall and narrow-shouldered with her mother's light skin and serious gray eyes, surveyed the space without comment. She tied her brown hair back and began clearing debris immediately, as if motion itself could keep fear at bay. Michael Turner, 20, solidly built with Jack's jawline and a quiet intensity, tested the stove. Then the walls, his silence heavy, but controlled. Lucas Turner, 18, thinner and more restless, paced the room, rubbing his hands together, eyes darting to the broken window where snowflakes drifted in. None of them complained. That hurt Jack more than if they had. By the next morning, Jack was walking into the town's only high school before sunrise. The building loomed large and impersonal, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly inside. The head custodian, Frank Delaney, a stocky man in his late 50s with thinning hair and permanently chapped hands, looked Jack over carefully. Night shifts, Frank said. Minimum wage. Floors, bathrooms, trash. It's not pretty. Jack nodded. Pride had burned out days ago. He took the mop and bucket without hesitation. Emily found work at a roadside diner just off the highway. The manager, Linda Brooks, a sharp-eyed woman with cropped blonde hair and a voice that carried authority without cruelty, handed Emily an apron and warned her the hours were long and the customers worse. Emily thanked her anyway. Michael and Lucas picked up day labor where they could, hauling lumber, unloading trucks, paid by the hour cash when possible. They came home each night with sore backs and numb fingers, saying little, doing less, conserving energy the way people do when survival becomes routine. Winter returned in earnest. Snow fell heavier earlier, blanketing the cabin in white silence. Inside, the cold was sharper than Jack had anticipated. The stove resisted heat, coughing smoke before going dark. They layered blankets, wore coats indoors, slept close together. Jack noticed the changes quickly. Michael's cough began as a rasp, then deepened, echoing through the night. Lucas spiked a fever skin burning beneath Jack's calloused hand, teeth chattering despite the layers. Emily tried to hide her worry, but Jack saw it in the way she hovered, in how she pressed her lips together when she thought he wasn't looking. Rex curled near the stove each night, his breath visible in the cold air, body tense, as if prepared to spring into action against an invisible threat. Jack watched him one evening, the dog's ribs rising and falling slowly, amber eyes duller than before. The sight twisted something in Jack's chest. He sat on the edge of the bed frame, leather jacket still on, and reached into his pocket. Anna's wedding ring lay there, catching the weak light from a bare bulb. Forever. He rolled it between his fingers, remembering her laugh, the way she had believed warmth could always be created somehow. Jack understood then, with a clarity that felt almost cruel. Love did not fix broken roofs. Promises did not stop the cold, and faith alone could not keep his children breathing easily through the night. The cabin creaked around them, wind slipping through every flaw, indifferent to memory or intention. Jack closed his hand around the ring and stared into the dark, already knowing that something sacred was about to be lost, so that something essential could survive. Snow fell lightly over the town that morning. thin flakes drifting without urgency, the kind of cold that felt quiet rather than cruel, settling into the cracks of sidewalks and old brick storefronts. Jack Turner walked down Main Street with his collar pulled up and his gray wool scarf wrapped tight boots scraping against salted pavement. He had not slept more than an hour. Michael's coughing had worsened overnight, deep and hollow, and Lucas had burned with fever until dawn. Jack's mind moved in circles, counting breaths, counting hours, counting what little time he felt he had left before the cold took something from him that could not be fixed. Rex walked close at his side, black and tan coat dusted with snow ears, alert, pace steady, as if he understood exactly where they were going and why. The jewelry shop sat half a block from the old post office, wedged between a shuttered bookstore and a pawn shop. The sign above the door read, "Hayes Jewelry," in faded gold letters. Jack hesitated before pushing the door open. The bell chimed softly, the sound oddly intimate, like an intrusion into a private space. Inside, the air smelled faintly of metal and old paper. The counters were worn smooth, the glass cloudy with age. Behind the counter sat Mr. William Hayes, a thin, elderly man with a stooped back and carefully combed white hair. His hands were long and precise fingers permanently stained with the dark residue of years spent working gold and silver. Thick glasses rested low on his nose, magnifying eyes that were sharp despite their age. He looked up as Jack entered, taking him in slowly, noting the leather jacket cracked with use, the beard untrimmed, the exhaustion carved into the man's face. "What can I do for you?" Hayes asked, his voice calm, measured without curiosity. Jack did not answer immediately. He removed his gloves and reached into his pocket, his movements deliberate, almost reverent. He placed the ring on the counter first. Anna's ring. A thin gold band polished smooth by years of wear. Hayes picked it up with care, lifting a loop from the counter and examining the engraving inside. "Forever," Hayes read aloud. He glanced up briefly, then back at the ring. "Beautiful work. Simple, honest." He paused, then added quietly, "But once it's sold, it doesn't come back." Jack's jaw tightened. He remembered the day he slid that ring onto Anna's finger, her laughter bright and unguarded sunlight catching in her blonde hair as she squeezed his hand. That memory tried to surface fully, but another image forced its way in. Michael hunched over in the dark, gasping between coughs. Lucas shaking beneath layers of blankets, Emily standing in the doorway, pretending she wasn't afraid. Jack swallowed. He reached into his pocket again and placed the second item on the counter, an old pocket watch, its silver casing worn smooth at the edges. It had belonged to Anna's grandfather, passed down through generations, the only thing of real value her family had ever owned. Hayes opened it carefully, listening to the faint, stubborn tick. "Good piece," Hayes murmured. "They don't make them like this anymore." "How much?" Jack asked, his voice rough but steady. Hayes removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly with the edge of his shirt, giving the question the weight it deserved. "For both," he said at last, "it'll be enough to fix a roof, replace windows, and get you heat. But you'll be paying with memory, not money." Jack nodded once. "That's fine." Hayes studied him for a long moment, then nodded in return. He did not argue. He counted out the cash methodically, the soft sound of bills stacking on the counter filling the small shop. Jack did not watch. He closed his eyes instead. The repairs began 2 days later. Jack worked his night shift, then came home to help where he could, hauling boards, holding ladders, learning by watching. The roof was patched. First warped shingles, replaced holes, sealed. New windows followed plastic frames, stark and white against the cabin's rough wood. Finally, a used cast-iron stove was installed, heavy and ugly and perfect. Jack paid every dollar without hesitation, watching the stack of money disappear the way breath does in winter air. That night, for the first time since moving in, warmth spread through the cabin. The stove crackled metal popping softly as it heated. Rex lay beside it, body stretched out, eyes closed, breathing slow and even. Michael slept without coughing. Lucas's fever broke sweat, dampening his hair, but leaving his skin cooler beneath Jack's touch. Emily sat at the small table, shoulders finally relaxing, her face soft in the amber light. Jack sat on the edge of his bed, long after the others slept. He removed his gloves and stared at his left hand. The ring was gone. His finger felt lighter, strangely exposed, a pale indentation marking where gold had rested for 15 years. He rubbed his thumb over the empty place, feeling nothing but skin. He stood slowly, crossed the room, and added another log to the fire. The warmth pushed back the cold inch by inch. The cabin breathed differently now, less hostile, less eager to claim what lived inside it. Jack watched the flames until his eyes burned. The ring was gone. The promise it carried was no longer something he could touch. But his children were alive, breathing evenly in the next room, and Rex lifted his head once, tail thumping softly against the floor before settling again. Jack sat back down, hands resting on his knees, and let the heat reach his bones. He did not cry. He did not speak. He only stayed awake, guarding what remained. Winter no longer announced itself with snowstorms or sudden cold fronts. It simply stayed lingering over the hills and the cabin, as if it had decided this place was not worth leaving. Jack Turner woke each morning before the light, his body stiff and aching, the kind of pain that settled into bones and refused to move. 18 months blurred together into a single relentless stretch of days. He worked 16, sometimes 18 hours at a time, driven not by ambition, but by necessity. At night, he scrubbed floors at the high school until his hands burned raw from chemicals, and cold water the hallways empty, except for the echo of his boots and the hum of fluorescent lights. During the day, he repaired the cabin board by board, replacing rotting planks, sealing cracks, learning trades he had never planned to master. When spring finally cracked the ice, he broke ground behind the cabin with a borrowed shovel, his back screaming as he turned soil for a garden that barely promised survival. He built a rough chicken coop from scrap wood, raised hens, collected eggs, and sold them to neighbors who passed the cabin with cautious curiosity. Every dollar mattered. Every dollar went into the same place. Rex never left his side. The German shepherd had grown leaner, but no less vigilant, his black and tan coat roughened by weather, his muzzle whitening further with age. Each night Rex waited by the cabin door until Jack returned from work, ears lifting at the sound of distant footsteps. Each morning he followed Jack into the woods, padding silently beside him as they gathered firewood or checked traps. The dog's loyalty was not loud or dramatic. It was constant, unquestioning, the kind that endured without needing reassurance. Emily Turner changed in ways Jack noticed but never mentioned. At 22, she should have been planning a future, but instead she aged quietly, her face losing softness, her eyes sharpening with responsibility. She worked long shifts at the diner, came home smelling of grease and coffee, then helped tend the garden without complaint. Her brown hair was always tied back, now her posture straighter, her laughter rare. Michael Turner withdrew into himself, speaking only when necessary, his once expressive face settling into a permanent calm that worried Jack more than anger would have. He worked harder than anyone lifting, hauling, returning home, with hands blistered and bleeding, saying nothing. Lucas Turner learned too quickly what it meant to carry weight. At 18, he managed the chicken's tract expenses and stepped into decisions without being asked, his restlessness replaced by a seriousness that made Jack look away when he noticed it. Jack kept going until his body failed him. One night while mopping the school hallway, the world tilted. His vision narrowed, sound receding as if underwater. He collapsed beside the bucket, the mop clattering against the tile. He woke under harsh white light, the smell of antiseptic thick in the air. Dr. Helen Morris stood over him. A woman in her early 40s with dark hair pulled into a severe bun, and tired eyes that had seen too much of the same story. She examined him silently, flipping through charts, pressing fingers into his wrist. "You're exhausted," she said finally, her voice firm but not unkind. "Malnourished, overworked. If you keep this up, your body will give out completely." She met his gaze directly. "You're destroying yourself." Jack tried to sit up, failed, then forced himself upright anyway. "I can't stop," he said simply. Dr. Morris sighed, rubbing her temple. "You have children. You need to think about them." "I am Jack," replied his voice flat with certainty. He left the clinic the next morning and went straight back to work. The pain became background noise, something to be managed, not avoided. Nights blurred into mornings. Seasons shifted, but the rhythm did not. Eggs sold steadily. Vegetables grew and were harvested canned sold at a small roadside stand. Cash folded and unfolded until it softened, then disappeared into a metal box Jack kept hidden beneath his bed. He counted the money each week, each month, tracking progress with obsessive focus. The number climbed slowly, painfully, dollar by dollar. The ring never left his thoughts. Anna's ring. The weight of it lingered on his finger long after the skin had forgotten its shape. Jack replayed the moment he sold it, often not with regret exactly, but with resolve. That sacrifice had bought them warmth, time, breath. Now he intended to buy it back. Not because of sentimentality, but because promises mattered even when they hurt. Rex aged visibly during that time, moving slower joints, stiff in the mornings, but he never failed to rise when Jack did. Emily once suggested Jack rest just for a day. He shook his head. Michael once offered to work more hours. Jack refused. Lucas once asked how much was left. Jack answered honestly, and Lucas nodded, understanding more than Jack wanted him to. The box beneath the bed grew heavier. Jack added bills without ceremony, never celebrating milestones. The goal was clear. Everything else was secondary. The winter did not end in snow or thaw. It ended only when Jack decided it would, when the number in the box finally felt real, tangible, close enough to reach. One night after counting the money again, Jack closed the lid carefully and slid the box back into its place. He lay down fully clothed, Rex settling beside the bed, and stared at the ceiling. His body ached, his hands trembled, his future remained uncertain. But his purpose did not waver. He would reclaim what he had given up, no matter the cost. Late summer settled gently over the town. The air warm, but restrained sunlight soft against old brick buildings and familiar streets that had once felt unreachable. Jack Turner stood at the edge of Main Street, again 18 months older than the man who had last walked this road, his body leaner, harder, carved by labor and endurance. His leather jacket hung looser on his shoulders now, the brown worn smooth at the elbows, the red and navy flannel beneath faded by countless washes. His beard was trimmed but still rough gray, threading more boldly through the dark. He held a thick envelope against his chest, fingers tight around it, feeling the weight inside, money earned not in luck or chance, but in exhaustion calluses and nights that never fully ended. Rex sat at his side, posture calm tail resting on the sidewalk, amber eyes alert but peaceful, as if sensing that this moment was different from all the others. The sign above the door read, "Hayes Jewelry Unchanged." Jack hesitated before entering, his breath catching briefly in his throat. He pushed the door open. The bell chimed the same soft sound it had made a year and a half earlier, only this time it did not feel like an intrusion. Mr. William Hayes looked up from the counter. He had aged slightly, shoulders more rounded, white hair thinner, but his eyes were sharp as ever behind thick lenses. He recognized Jack immediately. "You came back," he said quietly. Not a question. Jack nodded and placed the envelope on the counter. He did not sit. His hands trembled slightly as he slid the envelope forward. "It's all here," he said. His voice was steady, but the effort behind it showed in the tightness of his jaw. Hayes opened the envelope and began counting slowly, methodically, bills stacked into neat piles. The sound of paper against glass filled the shop. Jack did not look away. When Hayes finished, he nodded once. "You kept your word," he said almost to himself. He unlocked the safe behind the counter and removed a small velvet box. He placed it gently on the counter between them and opened the lid. The ring lay inside unchanged. Thin gold polished smooth, the engraving still clear forever. Jack reached for it with hands that had rebuilt a house, hauled lumber-scrubbed floors, planted seeds, and buried grief deep enough to survive. He lifted the ring carefully, turned it once, then slid it onto his left hand. The metal was cool at first, unfamiliar, then slowly warmed against his skin, settling where it had always belonged. Something in Jack's chest loosened a tension he had not realized he carried until that moment. Rex stood tail, giving a single quiet wag. Hayes watched without speaking. After a moment, he said, "Most people never come back. They sell and move on." He met Jack's eyes. "You didn't." Jack closed his hand, then opened it again, looking at the ring as though it were proof of something only he could understand. "Some things aren't meant to be lost," he said. That evening, the cabin glowed warmly against the darkening forest. Light spilled through the windows, steady and inviting. Jack pushed the door open, Rex padding in beside him, and was met immediately by Emily. She looked at his hand first, then at his face. Her eyes filled before she smiled, stepping forward to wrap her arms around him. She was thinner than she had been 18 months earlier, her features sharper, but her embrace was strong. Michael stood behind her, nodding once the corner of his mouth, lifting just enough to show pride. Lucas grinned openly, the seriousness he had carried for so long, breaking for the first time in months. "Dad," he said softly, "you did it." Jack looked around. The cabin was no longer the broken shell it had been. The walls were solid, the roof tight, the stove glowing with steady heat. Outside the small garden lay quiet soil, rich and ready for the next season. Rex settled near the door, head on his paws, watching the room with calm satisfaction. Jack raised his hand, letting the light catch the ring. It gleamed softly, not as a symbol of what he had lost, but of what he had endured. He thought of Anna, of her laughter, of the promise they had made, without knowing how hard forever could be. He did not speak her name aloud, but he felt her presence in the warmth of the room, in the safety of the walls, in the quiet breathing of his children as they moved about the cabin. He stepped outside alone for a moment, Rex following him onto the porch. The evening air was cool, gentle. Jack looked at the cabin, the land, the life they had rebuilt piece by piece. He turned the ring once on his finger, the engraving brushing his skin. Forever was not about holding on blindly. It was about knowing when to let go, when to sacrifice, and when to fight to reclaim what truly mattered. Jack rested his hand on Rex's head, the dog leaning into the touch, and stood there until the light inside the cabin dimmed, slightly content in the knowledge that some promises, no matter how tested, never truly left. Sometimes God does not answer our prayers with sudden rescue or instant relief. Sometimes the miracle comes disguised as endurance, as strength that appears only after we think we have none left. Jack's journey reminds us that faith is not proven when life is easy, but when we keep walking even after everything is taken from us. When he let go of what he loved most, God did not forget him. Instead, God gave him time, breath, and the chance to rebuild one honest day at a time. In our own lives, we may feel abandoned, exhausted, or unseen. But perhaps the miracle is already happening quietly through your persistence, your love, and your refusal to give up. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel to support stories that heal. And may God bless you, protect your family, and grant you strength for every tomorrow.